They say fire is mercy, that it gives light to what it destroys. But mercy was never meant to flicker. Mercy burns. You're listening to whispering narratives, stories that bite and never let go. Tonight, we open the forest again. I woke to the sound of breathing trees, slow, synchronized like lungs filled with ash. When I opened my eyes, the forest was alive with candles. Thousands, maybe millions. Their flames leaned inward, not outward, as if the night itself were inhaling them. Each one hummed in a pitch that matched a human cry I'd once heard. The wind was wrong. It didn't pass through the trees. It circled, whispered, argued with itself. And above, the moon hung swollen and trembling, a pale heart beating behind a veil of red mist. One drop fell from it, a streak of bloodlight that hissed when it hit the ground. The smell that rose from that wound was iron and memory. I stood, or something like standing. My legs were still more beast than man. Bone met dirt like old lovers. Every nerve felt stretched between two bodies, one remembering the hunt, the other, the guilt. That's when I heard her voice. "You still keepy? Watch over them." It came from everywhere, sliding between candle flames, coiling around my spine. I didn't answer. The forest would tell her I was awake. It always does. When I moved, the candles reacted. The ones closest to me dimmed, as though afraid of what they lit. I saw names carved into their wax, hundreds of them curling down the stems like veins. I recognized some: villagers, hunters, lovers, my kills. Each name was a life the moon had purchased with my hunger, each flame a receipt. "You counted them once," the voice reminded. "You stopped at 300. I stopped when I realized I'd never finish, I said. My voice rasped, metal on stone, a sound learned from centuries of regret. The air trembled, candles bent in unison. From the darkness between the trunks, a figure began to emerge. Her steps made no sound, yet every flame bowed as she passed. She wore the color of morning before color existed, robes woven from shadow and silver thread. Her eyes were twin eclipses, swallowing starlight whole. The witch, the one who made the moon bleed. I remembered her scent, rain over hot iron, lavender crushed in confession. I remembered her hands, slick with my creation, shaping me from her own blood and borrowed light. I remembered her saying, "You will guard them." But I didn't guard, I devoured. She raised a lantern, and inside it burned a single white flame. Steady, defiant, the only one not trembling in this graveyard of light. "Do you know what this one means?" she asked. I sniffed the air. "Mine." She nodded once. "Your first breath, your last promise." I looked at her and saw time's cruelty, written in the cracks around her mouth. She had not aged, she had eroded. Magic preserves the shape, but not the sorrow. "What do you want, witch?" I asked, "to end the echo." I laughed, low and broken. "You can't unteach the moon to bleed." She walked closer, each step erased. 3 candles. They extinguished with a hiss like drowned serpents. "You misunderstand. I'm not here to unmake what I made. I'm here to finish it." Her words crawled across my skin. Finish. That meant obliteration. Or absolution. Perhaps both. "Look around you," she said. "Each flame is a name the curse has taken. When I lit them, I believed I could count the cost of sin. Now I see the fire has its own arithmetic." She placed the lantern on a root between us. The light painted her face with something like forgiveness. "I can't carry this forest any longer." "And you think I can?" "You already do. Every howl you've swallowed, every shadow that fears its reflection, you hold them. You're the sum of what I couldn't forgive." The forest shivered. A wind slithered down from the bleeding moon. I could feel the sky listening. She reached into the lantern and pinched the flame between her fingers. It should have died. Instead, it screamed. The cry was not human. It was every throat I had torn open, all pleading in one breath. I staggered back. The flames around us flared, lighting the forest in waves. Shadows danced like ghosts trying to climb out of the soil. "Do you remember what you were before?" she asked. "I was nothing," I said. "You made sure of that?" "No." Her eyes softened. "You were everything, and I divided you to save the rest." The forest groaned, bark split as if the trees themselves were remembering their roots in blood. A crimson drop fell from the moon and splattered onto my arm. Where it landed, fur burned away, revealing the shape of the sigil she branded me with centuries ago. That mark pulsed now, alive, angry, awake. "You feel it?" she whispered. "The tide turning. The moon wants what's hers." She looked upward. I followed her gaze. The moon's surface rippled like liquid glass. Cracks formed, glowing veins across its face. Something beneath it was moving, slow, deliberate, vast. "What did you call back?" I asked. "Not what," she said. "Who?" The sound came then, deep as thunder, wide as the horizon. A heartbeat that belonged to no living thing. The candles shook, their flames stretched, pointing toward the sky, toward their maker. "I gave the moon my blood," the witch said, voice trembling. "Now it wants more." All around us candles began to rise, lifted by invisible hands. Their flames joined into ribbons of red light spiraling upward. I watched them vanish into the bleeding clouds. For a moment, it was beautiful. Then I smelled the ash of their endings. The witch looked at me, and for the first time, fear shone through her ancient calm. "She's waking." "The moon?" "No," she said. "What sleeps inside her." The heartbeat thundered again, louder, closer. The forest tilted, gravity bending like a bow about to loose an arrow. I dug my claws into the earth. The witch spread her arms wide, blood dripping from her palms. "I called her once," she shouted over the quake. "Now she calls me back." The last thing I saw before the world folded into light was her face, lit by her own defiance, whispering something I could not hear. Then the sky broke open and the moon bled fire. The night they forged me, the forest was younger and cruel in its innocence. Rivers still believed they were mirrors. Owls spoke law, not omen. The village below the ridge smelled of pitch, sheep fat, and the faint sugar of fear. Life arranged, in small circles against a black circumference. She came to the ridge when the moon had the color of milk worry, alone, or so she let the world believe. The witch was not yet legend. She was a woman whose hands had learned to hold knives like prayers. Her hair was bound with red twine, a little too tight, the way guilt cinches thought. She carried a bowl carved from the heart of a thunderstruck tree and a rope of silver links that did not jingle. Silver does not sing for mercy. I watched from the tree line that no one else could see, an edge between what had a name and what refused one. I had no body yet, but I had a contour. Hunger, looking for bones. I was the echo of something older that the world had tried to forget. Teeth without a jaw, a will without a throat. If I had a shape then, it was wind that remembered claws. She drew a circle with ash and salt, measured from the 4 corners the elders whispered about, and the 5th corner she never told them. The bowl went in the center. She cut her palm with a blade that did not like her, and when her blood fell, the ground leaned upward as if thirsty. Moonlight thickened, a syrup gliding down, pooling in the bowl with the red. That light was not the moon's reflection. It was the moon's answer. She spoke 8 names that are now dust, and one that is still alive, the one that belongs to me. The air around the circle pressurized, like a cathedral deciding to kneel. Leaves inverted. The river below forgot its direction and ran toward the ritual, climbing the hill like a snake with a thirst for sky. The stars crowded their faces together to see. I felt the first tether loop around me, buttery soft at first, then tightening until breath, whatever counted as breath, was a negotiation. She did not tremble, not outwardly. Inside, every heartbeat she had ever owed someone else lined up behind her ribs and asked to be counted. She ignored them. She spoke the rule that allowed the binding. What I love, I divide. What I divide, I keep. Silver links rattled without sound, and the circle became a well without a bottom. She lowered her hand into the bowl and stirred, her blood with moonlight. It made a sound like a choir of doors opening down a long hallway. When she lifted her hand, the mixture clung to her skin as if reluctant to leave. She drew lines in the air that only the guilty can see, and I saw each one as a road leading into a body I did not own yet. The first road became bone. It assembled itself the way frost does on a grave, quiet, inevitable, facing other shapes, to make its own. Long bones blossomed like pale spears. Ribs unfurled in a cage that knew it was both prison and armor. The second road became muscle, red cords braided from vows and disobedience. I could hear them tuning, like strings stretched to a pitch that makes the throat ache. The third road laid fur along the frame, each strand a hair-thin scar taken from someone else's fear. When my lungs formed, I learned what the world smelled like. Wet bark, warm wool, the iron perfume of the bowl, her scent, lavender armored in smoke. I inhaled, and the circle inhaled with me, candles blooming where none had been, small suns agreeing to burn for a cost. Her eyes never left my face. That is the first thing I remember of being seen. Not horror, not triumph, but a cataloguing. She was taking inventory of a sin she had decided to own. She spoke the fourth road, and the fifth, building me a spine that remembered standing before it ever tried walking. She folded the sixth into claws that could choose not to release. She whispered the seventh into teeth that could choose not to break. Choice was always part of the cruelty. Monsters made of accident are tragedies. Monsters made of purpose are instruments. When she reached the eighth road, the circle fought back. The night does not like to be divided. Wind drove tacks of cold into her arms. The silver rope writhed. The river hissed at the salt. Something in the dark, what the elders feared enough to nickname, but never brave enough to name, leaned closer. It was the first time I smelled it, a rot that wasn't decay yet, the aroma of an animal idea waiting to be born. She flinched just once and cut deeper into her palm. Her blood met the eighth road and turned it into voice. My first sound was not a howl. It was an apology wearing fur. It came out wrong, damaged by new lungs and old intent, a broken pipe trying to be a hymn. She heard it, and the corners of her mouth failed to keep their discipline. Not a smile, something weaker, relief. Guard them, she said. Not kill for me, not hunt for me. Guard. The word fit my new bones badly, but not cruelly. She looped the silver rope around my chest. It burned without flame, engraving a sigil that nested like a knot above my heart. I still bear it. When rain hits it, the water tastes like bells. I stood fully then, beast and confession in one body. The circle contracted, sealing the arithmetic she had written with blood. With my first step, I learned weight. With my second, I learned debt. The village below exhaled in sleep, a chorus of tiny trusting sounds. I turned my head toward them and felt a heat in my mouth that had nothing to do with hunger. It was purpose, sharpened, until it could cut. She reached out. I lowered my head. Her palm on my brow was a page closing. The river remembered to run, downhill again. "Tell me the rule I gave you," she said, not a question, a command shaped like memory. I did not have words yet, but the rule wrote itself along the inside of my teeth. Take only what threatens, spare what kneels. Leave the first name you learn unbroken. The night held its breath to hear whether I would keep it. For a while I did. Wolves understand shape, men understand promise. I was the compromise designed to keep a worse thing from learning both. We found that worse thing quickly. It hunted by debt, not meat, not heat, not motion, but ledgers. It walked into homes through owed doors and ate what was unfinished in people. It had no eyes, only a face full of tally marks. When it turned toward the village, I stepped between. That was my first hunt, and the last time she smiled without pain. Silver burned deeper as I tore the ledger loose from its spine. My claws learned subtraction. The thing fell apart in sums and sighs, and the village slept on, no wiser for having kept its children. Afterward, I stood at the ridge's lip and waited to feel clean. I did not. Killing is a broom with bristles made of questions. You sweep one hallway, you raise dust in 12 more. She stood beside me, breathing like someone learning to be human again after pretending to be a god. "This is what I wanted," she said, voice small, almost ashamed of the size of the night. "A weapon that chooses, a choice that protects. But choice is a muscle, and muscles grow hungry." The moon, oh the moon, watched us from her cold balcony. She had drunk blood and now had a taste. Each time I guarded, the light thickened. Each time I spared, the light leaned closer. It learned me the way a hunter learns terrain. And when the village offered me thanks the only way they knew, oaths made under breath, promises bartered in dark kitchens, the moon listened to the trade and wrote an extra clause. Oaths breed teeth faster than bites do. The curse began there, not in my hunger but in their bargains. I was the knife. The world kept finding reasons to cut. I returned to the circle night after night. The witch kept the bowl clean and the rope quiet. She never added blood again, but the stain would not fade. She taught me where to stand, how to look away when mercy needed its privacy, how to hear the small sounds people make when they break and choose to call it healing. "Guard them," she would say, and mostly I did, until the moon decided to copy us. She bled once. For me, the sky learned the shape of that gift and began to make its own. By the time the elders started carving little wolf charms to bribe the night, I realized the circle's outline had moved. It slid under doors, into cradles, across lips. The village drew the circle for me with every bargain they made not to be afraid. The moon inked it permanent. The binding was never a chain. It was a contract, the kind that writes itself every time someone whispers, "Only this once. That is how I was made and how they made the rest." Not just by my teeth, but by their sentences. When the first child changed under a harvest moon without a bite taken, I tasted chalk on the wind and knew the circle had learned to draw itself. And somewhere far above, the milk-worried moon licked a thin red line from her lip and smiled. They never meant to worship me. They only meant to thank me, those first trembling villagers with their clay cups and hopeful lies. But gratitude is the first ingredient of worship, and worship breeds repetition. Repetition becomes ritual, and ritual, that's where curses learn to sing. The moon had been pale for months after my making. Then one harvest it turned red again. A blush at first, then a fever. The witch watched it from her ridge, jaw set, eyes full of arithmetic. I was below, circling the sheep pens, breathing in the crowding smell of trust. The animals stared at me with the same calm the witch used when she lied to herself. That night, a farmer knelt by his dying child and whispered a bargain into the dirt. Not to me, to the light that watched me. "Take my strength," he said. "Let her breathe. One more dawn." And something answered. The girl lived. The man rose, changed. His eyes were rimmed with silver. He never slept again. I found him 3 days later in the woods, chewing bark like bread. He looked at me as though he'd been expecting a brother. "She kept her end," he said, "so now I keep mine." Then he lifted his hand, and the nails lengthened like drawn-out promises. He smiled, the kind of smile that splits. That was the first replica. The witch blamed herself. though it was never her blood alone that did this. Power is contagious to those who watch it too long. She tried to burn the field where he'd prayed, but fire only learned the song faster. The smoke that rose that night carried syllables. Guard them. Guard them. Mockery, not command. The villagers began to understand a terrible truth. You could bargain with light. You just had to bleed first. Some bled their wrists, some their faith. Each cut was a door, and the moon was patient enough to walk through every one. It spread quiet, like mold on scripture. A merchant swore he'd never be cheated again. His shadow grew fangs and killed his competitor. A midwife whispered for her stillborn to cry, and it did, teeth first. Oaths became the new infection. Bites were just the proof. The witch tried to rewrite the law with counter-chants, the way you erase a name by saying it backward. But the red hymn had memory. Every time she spoke, her words came back with an echo that wasn't hers. I heard it too, a chant that did not belong to any mouth, a chorus of the changed. The moon remembers debt, silver wounds, guilt binds. Name what you hunt or become it. Those 3 lines were the law after that. The first rule of the curse was memory. The second was mirror. The third was choice turned inside out. Each full moon recited them like scripture. I roamed beyond the ridge, following the sound of newborn howls. They were clumsy creatures at first, half-formed, fur only where shame was thickest. They didn't hunt. They confessed. They spoke secrets to trees, begged the sky to undo them, then tore out their own names. The forest kept them anyway. Every generation sang the hymn louder. When the old faith finally collapsed under its own crosses, people built shrines to the moon out of iron and fear. They believed if they lit enough candles, she would see their light and forgive. But candles don't plead, they count. And the forest where I wake now is only the ledger grown tall. The witch kept herself apart. She grew thin on repentance and thicker on rage. She tried to warn me that each curse was a line added to the original spell, each line dragging me further from the purpose she had meant. I asked her once why she hadn't let me die after the first night. She said, I wanted the moon to forgive me, not forget me. Forgiveness and forgetting sound similar when screamed. The red hymn became language. Wolves howled it, children dreamed it, priests translated it into sermons. And still the witch stood at her ridge, hands wrapped in bandages she would not remove, watching her invention multiply. One winter, snow fell red, not blood, dust from the moon itself. The sky was flaking. People crawled out of their houses to taste it, laughing like drunks. The taste was iron and promise. When they slept that night, their dreams sprouted fur. I watched it happen from the edge of the forest, helpless and horrified and hungry in equal measure. By dawn, the ground was scored with paw prints that ended where the sky began. The witch sought me again. Her voice was smoke-thin. You hear them, she said. I need you to listen closer. The hymn is changing its lyrics. It's learning to speak my name. I wanted to tell her the truth. It was also speaking mine. Every new wolf carried my sound hidden in their snarl. The curse wasn't spreading like plague. It was spreading like heritage. The red hymn had made a choir of my guilt. When the first pack formed without me, I knew I was obsolete. Creation does not ask permission to evolve. They called the moon Mother, and I became the ghost that taught her how to hold a knife. One night I stood on a cliff of ash and listened. The red hymn echoed from hills and throats, an unbroken circle of sound wrapped around the world. Each note a bargain, each bargain a birth. And in the center of it all, her heartbeat in the sky, steady, greedy, maternal. That was when I understood the final verse, the one she never taught me. The Creator binds, the creation breeds, until one remembers why the moon bleeds. The red hymn was never a song for me. It was a lullaby for her, and every time it was sung, she dreamed a little louder. The night she returned, the moon had edges again, knife sharp, honed on centuries of confession. Clouds pulled back like curtains cut on a bias. The forest stiffened. Even the stones put their shoulders together as if bracing for a blow that had taken 1,000 years to arrive. The first sign was not sound, not light. It was posture. Every candle straightened. Their flames, usually skittish as animals at a riverbank, rose to their full height and held. Smoke thinned into threads and braided itself into a single cord that ran through the trees toward the old ridge. I smelled rosemary boiled with iron. I tasted a copper vowel on the wind, her name, coming home. I went to the ridge in 3 strides that took a mile each. My paws found the prints they had left the first night of me, fossils still warm. The circle was there, no longer chalk, root now, black roots that had grown in the shape of the old geometry. In the center, a well of stone I did not remember, ringed in sigils that were both younger and angrier than the ones she branded into my chest. They were not alone. Women stood in a half-moon around the well, hair bound with red twine like hers. Had been, hands wrapped in linen, eyes luminous with fear they called faith, her bloodline, coven, the shape of the apology she had tried to carve into time. They hummed a low note that made the bark flake from nearby trunks in obedient curls. The air pressed down, and the well answered with a sigh that seemed to come from the bottom of the world. The water inside was black in a way that mocked the word black. It absorbed light and forgot to give it back. The youngest priestess slid a blade across her palm and let 3 drops fall. I counted each, 1 for Det, 1 for Door, 1 for Dawn, and the well accepted all 3 like a king taking kneeling gifts. The surface trembled, tore, then closed around a wrist. Her wrist. The witch climbed out of the stone like an oath recalling itself. Water fled her robes, candles leaned in. The coven stepped back as if space itself were making room for an older shape of it. She looked smaller than memory makes her, and larger than the world had any right to contain. The paradox of makers. Their bodies diminish, their shadows grow. Her eyes found me immediately, the way a compass remembers north after pretending it forgot. Beast, she said, the old word, not cruel but precise, language that fit like a scar. You kept watch, counting, I said, and the forest made the word creak under my weight. She took a breath and the well went still. Water respects lungs that have bargained with it. She reached into her robe and drew out the same lantern I had seen in the candle forest, white flame, steady as accusation. The coven's chant thinned, then tightened again around her as she lifted the lantern, and we were children of light and error once more. Why now? I asked, though I already knew. The moon above us was shedding flecks, little red petals dissolving on the air. Because the ledger learned to write itself, she said. And because the thing we kept it from is awake enough to ask for a verdict. Bjant, youngest of them, freckled, jaw clenched the way bravery often is, stepped forward. Mother, she said, though the word did not mean birth. We've gathered the names. We are ready to pay. The witch did not look at her. Her gaze stayed on me, as unkind and necessary as winter. No, she said. Tonight payment is not enough. Tonight we end the echo. The coven faltered. You could hear Doubt's little feet on the ring of stone. End it how? The freckled one whispered. The witch set the lantern on the well's rim and showed her palms. The bandage bled through in a slow, dignified way. The curse was never metal, she said to them. It was grammar. I taught the moon a sentence. It has grown into a religion. To end it, we don't break the knife. We stop speaking. She turned back to me. I didn't make you to live, she said. Each word cut to a clean edge. I made you to finish. The wind changed direction. That sentence had gravity. It pulled needles from branches and made them point at me like 100 tiny compasses panicking. Finish. The word was a bridge where there had only been water. I carry minds, I said. You know this. I looked toward the dark where smaller hearts beat and smaller bones rattled against their cages, all those who had learned my name by dreaming it. If I end, they break in the backlash. She nodded. I have stitched a pocket in the sky. She pointed at the moon with a surgeon's certitude, a fold where guilt can sleep without teeth. Give me your name, and I will place it there. I will place theirs too if they choose it. The coven recoiled, an instinct older than ritual, protect the self, mistrust mercy. One hissed, a trap. Another crossed herself with a symbol that didn't exist yesterday. The freckled one watched me instead, as if my decision would become her definition. A low quake rolled through the ridge. The well flexed from somewhere. Much too high came the sound of stone discovering it could bleed. Cracks lit across the lunar face like vein fire. I tasted the metallic sweetness you only get during childbirth and slaughter, and understood. The sky was in labor with something it didn't want to name. The witch stepped close enough for me to feel the old temperature of her. Listen, she said softly, and the world obeyed. Silence opened like a door. In it, I heard breathing that was not wind, something vast behind the moon, exhaling dust, inhaling oceans. The coven heard it too. One began to cry without tears. Called her once, the witch said, as shield. She comes now as judge. I lowered my head until my sigil met the lip of the well. The stone tasted like rain that had lost its patience. If I give you my name, I said, what happens to the rest? We ask them, she said, and turned to the trees. Come, they stepped from behind bark and root away wounded. Animals always do when the softest voice in the room belongs to someone who knows their wounds by architecture. Wolves, not half, not human, but with eyes that had learned to pronounce mercy, even as their mouths were full of other words. Children shivering inside coats of wrong inheritance. Hunters chewed into shapes they had sworn to kill. Dozens, then hundreds, ringing the ridge, candles blooming around their paws in respect or fear or both. The coven tightened. The freckled one swallowed the last of her childhood and lifted her chin. We finish, the witch said to them all. Not by fire, by consent, she faced the wolves. Your names are yours. You may keep them, or you may give them and sleep where knives cannot find you. She touched the lantern flame. It bent toward her finger like a bird to seed. The red hymn tried to rise. Habit is an animal with many lives, but she overrode it with a tone older than tone, a gravity that bends songs into silence. My chest ached. The sigil at my heart glowed, until rain hissed off it as steam. I thought of the first sheep I spared, of the ledger spine thing I subtracted from the world, of the farmer who chose bark over breath for the sake of a daughter who would die anyway. 20 harvests later, human to the last, smiling with the strength he had loaned her from his sleep. I thought of the children who wore my shape on moonlight like a borrowed coat and took it off at dawn, ashamed of both how good and how bad it felt. Name, she said, eyes on mine, steady as a surgeon's hands. Give me the first of you. I opened my mouth, and the old syllables came up like stones lifted from a deep river, green, slick, unwilling to be held. My true name was a corridor with no doors, a sound you can only make by agreeing to be smaller after. I almost spoke it, then I smelled the smaller hearts below us, the ones bound in chains I had forged by killing the monsters that wanted them more crudely than I ever did. The backlash would rip them if I went alone. Mercy must be timed, otherwise it becomes another weapon. Not yet, I said, and the coven flinched as if denial were lightning. There is a debt we still owe, not to the moon, to the living. Her mouth thinned, which is how her face learned disappointment. She did not argue, she simply adjusted. Good makers adapt, even to their failures. She picked up the lantern, and its white flame reflected in the broken topaz of the moon above. Then we finish together, she said. But we finish. From the well, a rope of red light climbed into the air, humming at a pitch that makes teeth remember their ancestry. It tethered the ridge to the sky, a vein, a vow. The coven took their places along it, palms up, bleeding, Honest, wolves formed ranks as if old war lived in the bones of their grandparents. I stepped beside her. She did not touch me. We did not need that much ceremony. The world narrowed to a corridor between flame and gravity. Whisper with me, I breathed, so soft it would slip under any algorithm and into any ear that needed it. Don't blink. The next flame could be yours. Subscribe to the breath you keep. The moon answered with a shudder. Somewhere, 1,000 candles went out. Somewhere else, 1,000 more burst into light. The duel had not begun, but the world was already keeping score. The ridge trembled as if the mountain itself were remembering a wound. The red rope of light that linked earth and moon pulsed in slow, judicial beats. Each throb loosened a century of silence. Every tree on the slope bent a little lower, branches rattling like teeth in a wooden mouth. The witch stood within the circle of her coven, palms open, lantern high. The wolves crouched behind me, a ragged parliament of fur and remorse. Their eyes flickered silver, their hearts thudded like clocks keeping different hours. Above us the moon cracked wider, veins of brightness leaking through the crust of night. The air tasted like coins struck hot. She began the parley not with words but sound, a low hum that wrapped around my ribs and squeezed until the sigil burned. "Tell me what you carry," she said. "Names," I answered. "Thousands. I keep them so they don't have to remember the pain that made them." "And does it help?" "It keeps them asleep." Her gaze was a scalpel. "Sleep is not peace. You hoard their suffering like treasure." I wanted to snarl, to tell her she had no right to lecture me about stewardship, but truth has a way of turning the jaw stiff. "Someone must hold it," I said. "If I drop it, the curse floods back into their blood. They wake hungry. They make more." She stepped to the well's rim, robe brushing candle flame without catching. "Then give it to me." "No." The word came out half growl, half prayer. "You can't bear it. You made it once and it broke the sky. I have learned to bleed slower." That was almost mercy, almost pride. She reached into the lantern and drew out the white flame. It pooled across her fingers like molten glass. "If you surrender the names, I will sew them into the moon's scar. The wound will close, the light will fade back to silver." "And when the light fades," I asked, "what of the children who are half between? What of those who still dream in fur?" "They will forget. That is death by another door." Her eyes flashed, not anger exactly, but recognition. "You want them to remember." "I want them to choose." My voice broke on the last word. The sigil flared again, answering some command. Neither of us spoke. The air filled with the sound of chains tightening in the distance. My pack whimpered. A few howled low, confused by old orders returning to their bones. The witch lifted her bleeding hand. "Consent," she said to them, to me, to the idea of endings. "Say his name if you follow. Say mine if you refuse." For a long moment, the ridge was a grave waiting to decide who belonged in it. Then a pup, still more child than beast, howled my name. The sound was bright, naive. Others joined. A wave of sound broke over us, shaking the snow from the higher branches. My heart lurched with both shame and something close to joy. The witch's face softened. "So be it," she said. "Then we rewrite the debt." She drew the blood name sigil into the air, an Ouroboros of silver light biting its own tail. "Your lineage," she said, "is bound by hunger, mine by guilt. Together they keep the world balanced between night and dawn. If we join them once, more, the wound closes, but you and I vanish with it." "Finished together," I echoed. The phrase tasted of both promise and extinction. She offered her hand, one cut for both of us. I extended my claw, a moment before contact stretched. Like skin over bone, the world leaned in to watch. When our hands met, blood and silver mixed, flaring bright enough to carve shadows into the stone. The well groaned. The rope of red light twisted itself into a spiral and began to spin, pulling wind, smoke, and candle fire into orbit. Names unspooled from inside me. Whispered syllables, sighs, fragments of lullabies. They rose in a column of faint blue sparks. Each one paused above the witch's head, hesitated, then shot upward into the bleeding moon. It was beautiful and unbearable. I felt lighter by every soul released, and hollower by the same measure. The forest groaned as though mourning 1,000 funerals at once. The witch's lantern shattered. Its white flame dissolved into motes that drifted between us, forming a thin bridge of light. She looked at me across it and smiled, sadly, triumphantly, humanly. "Do you see?" she said. "The curse was only ever a conversation. We can end it by running out of things to say." But the rope above us didn't slow. It spun faster, turning crimson into gold, gold into white. The moon's surface peeled like skin. Underneath, something immense stirred. The heartbeat we'd heard since her return thundered again, closer. The witch's smile faltered. "What? Did you hide in her?" I asked. "Nothing," she whispered. "Someone." A shape pressed against the moon's inner shell. A vast silhouette, wings of broken geometry, face a blur of sorrow. It was the first light she had ever bargained with, the consciousness of the curse itself. It was waking. The rope snapped. The spiral collapsed into the well, dragging fire, blood, and wind. I grabbed the witch's arm. Her skin was cold as dawn frost. The world folded inward. Ridge, forest, wolves, coven, everything drawn toward that hole in reality. We held fast only because we held each other. Then, in the middle of the chaos, she spoke my true name, not in command, but in gratitude. So, sound steadied me. It also sealed our fates together. The light exploded outward, painting the clouds in arterial red. For a heartbeat, everything stopped. The moon, the wind, even fear. The blood name had been spoken in both directions at once. Creation, forgiving, creator. When the silence broke, it was not with sound, but with the smell of rain. Silver rain. It hissed on the rocks and cooled the sigil on my chest. The witch looked at me, exhausted and shining. "Now the duel can begin," she said. "Not between us, between what remains." I turned toward the forest below, where new candles were already blooming, small suns rising from puddles of silver water. Each flame held a reflection of my face, beast, man, and something between. Above them the moon bled slower, its pulse matching mine. The first spark leapt from the witch's palm like a thought deciding to become action. It touched a candle at the ridge's edge, and the tiny flame straightened, sharpened, then tore itself from the wick and flew, a spear of light, red at the core, white at the skin. I caught it between claw and sigil. It hissed like rain on a hot anvil and split into embers that drifted upward, uncertain whether to be stars. That was a life returned. The witch said, "If it breaks, it breaks. Into morning." I answered with motion. My arm carved a crescent through air. The claws sang the note iron sings when it remembers ore. The sound gathered the nearest candles, pulled their fire into a curve of heat that struck the ground in front of her and became a rib cage of light. Bars to stall, not wound. She stepped through as if ribs were a suggestion. The coven had retreated. To the rope of light, hands raised, mouths closed. No chant would help now. This was grammar beyond words. Below us the wolves formed a ring, their eyes coin bright, their hearts drum true. The forest's breath turned synchronous again. The old cathedral breathing in, breathing out, we circled. Each footfall trimmed a wick, each breath fed 10 more. The ledger counted, the moon watched. She cut the air, and a fan of candle spears opened toward me. I leapt, shoulder first, through the thinnest part. 3 spears grazed. The sigil drank them and burned. Pain came clean, a line etched with a steady hand. When I landed, I slammed both paws into earth. From my prints rose 2 columns of ash that unfurled into wolves made of cinders and memory. They lunged. She raised her hand. The cinder wolves turned to smoke mid-stride and became a flock of black birds that folded into the witch's shadow and vanished. Clever, I said. I had good material, she said, and her eyes, those eclipses, flared with a pride she did not intend. Another exchange. She sent a needle of light that threaded my scars together so tightly I could not move without tearing. Answered by dragging my claws over stone, pulling sparks into a halo, then dismissing the halo into a downward stroke that cut the stitched needles loose. Every filament that broke flew to a candle. A dozen wicks went dark at once, each with that small scream I would never get used to. Lives redeemed, debt rewritten. The duel was an abacus. She advanced. I retreated 1 pace, then another, letting her believe the press belonged to her. When the ground dipped, I sprang, arcing over her and raking the air. The wind itself bled. A sheet of red pressure dropped between us like a curtain, and every candle behind her flared as if applauding. A mistake. My breath hit the curtain. It bowed but did not break. She walked through again, unburned. I am the reason the wind has edges, she said, and her mouth almost smiled. We closed, claw to palm, vigil to lantern. When our weapons kissed, the light and the mark remembered the night they met in birth. And for one brief, dangerous instant, the world confused battle with blessing. Every candle on the ridge grew tall as fingers. Hundreds went out, hundreds more flamed higher. The ledger rebalanced with a banker's lack of poetry. In the pause, revelation arrived, quiet as snowfall. She had never come to force the ending. She wanted me to choose it. The duel was not to decide who won. It was to weigh what remained worthy of keeping. You wanted my consent, I said, ducking a scythe of light that burned a syllable into the bark of an old cedar. I wanted your will, she said, parrying a claw so near her throat I could feel the tide of her pulse. Only a willing blade can close a wound. How many candles do we buy with our blood? I asked. As many as cost us everything. She pivoted, low, her robe unfurled like a storm-taking wing, and the hem wrote a circle that tried to lock my ankles. I tore free, left fur and heat in a ring behind. The smell was a memory of the first oaths, those kitchen bargains that taught the moon to listen. Shame, useful as salt, stung the air. We traded shapes. She made a lattice of light, stepped up it and dropped toward me, blade of her hand pointed to divide. I caught her forearm. The sigil burned a mirror of itself into her skin. She did not cry out. She pressed her other palm to my chest, and the sigil answered with a tone like a bell struck underwater. The tone moved through me, found the names. I held and shook them the way wind shakes chimes. Not to break, to ask. In that ringing I saw them. Children who had grown into men and women with careful lives, hunters who had learned to lay down steel, mothers who locked the cellar each full moon and sang lullabies to their own bones until the hunger slept. All the near saints and almost monsters. The curse had bent and not broken. They were the candles that refused to go out. 10, scattered across centuries, burning with the calm of necessary pain. If we end now, she said, voice raw with the cost of honesty, those 10 teach nothing. They simply stop. And if we don't, I asked, they drown in the choir. We collided again. I raked a glyph on the ground with both hands, a copy of the sigil on my chest but inverted. It spat sparks. The sparks became teeth, the teeth arranged into a jaw that snapped at her lantern. She flipped the lantern behind her back and pressed, down on the jaw with a surgeon's patience, until it remembered it had been made of forgiveness and collapsed into harmless light. Her hand flashed. A thread of red connected my throat to her palm. A leash, not to pull, to measure. She tugged once and the thread sang. I felt every life I had spared tug back on the other end. The sum was heavy enough to kneel a continent. Choose. she said, and stepped into my reach. We became a knot. Claw caught wrist, wrist found sigil, lantern kissed mark, mark answered flame. The world narrowed to a braided cord of blood, light, intention. Each heartbeat stamped a line on the ledger, each line either paid or charged. I pushed her away, not in anger, but in order to see her whole. She slid back, heels digging twin graves in gravel. The lantern cracked, a seam of white leaked down her wrist. The sight of it, her light bleeding, tilted me. "You are not a god," I said. "I never was," she answered. "I was a sentence you mistook for a son." The ground heaved, a rope to the moon yanked taut above. The shell of light split farther, and the silhouette inside pressed its face to the fracture, as if trying to recognize us. The sound that followed was not a roar. It was the soft, enormous exhale of something deciding whether to be merciful. We both looked up, only a heartbeat, but the ledger counted that too. While our eyes were on the verdict, the forest chose. Candles began to go out in patterns that formed words no human alphabet could carry. The wolves howled in chords that braided yes and no into a third answer. The coven raised their bleeding, hands higher, offering a kind of prayer that finally sounded like listening. I lowered my head and charged, not to kill, to commit. She braced, knees bent, palms forward, lantern held like a thurible. I struck the ground in front of her and sent a shock through root and rock. The candle sea rippled, flame leapt to flame until the ridge shone like the inside of an ember. In that light, every scar I carried spoke in raised script. She read them. "I let her do it," I said. Her face emptied of everything but purpose. She drew a circle in the air with 2 fingers. The circle filled with our mixed blood, then with moonlight, then with the color of forgiven things. She placed it over my heart. The sigil quaked, then quieted, then opened like a mouth that had learned a new word. "Tell me your name," she said. Not command, invitation. I gathered the stones of it from the river of my throat. Each syllable cost a century. When the last fell into air, the candles on the ridge bowed. The rope to the moon glowed white, not red. The silhouette behind the lunar shell leaned back, listening the way a judge listens when the plea finally changes. The witch echoed my name back to me once perfectly. The echo became a blade of light. She lifted it. I lifted my eyes. Between us the duel ended and something cleaner began. "Now," I said, and I knelt. Silence arrived first. It didn't descend. It bloomed, like a flower of stillness unfolding in a field of fire. Candles froze mid-flame, ash hung in place, too awed to fall. Even the wolves stopped breathing. The witch stood before me, lantern shattered, its white core hovering between her hands. The light pulsed in rhythm with my heart and the moon's, 3 beats in sync, a trinity that was never meant to exist. She looked up. I followed her gaze. The moon was opening, not cracking, not bleeding, opening like an eye choosing truth over sleep. From its center unfurled a veil of silver dust spinning into petals. At its core, the silhouette we had feared now took shape. Not a beast, not a goddess, but something simpler, a memory of light learning to forgive itself. The rope that tied earth to sky shivered and sang. 1,000 names rose from the forest, blue sparks of souls that had lingered too long. They circled the ridge like fireflies with purpose, then spiraled up into the open moon. Each spark that passed through the veil turned white and was gone. Each one that hesitated fell back to earth and became a candle. The choosing had begun. The witch raised her voice, not a chant now, but a question spoken to creation itself. Who wishes to rest? Her words spread through the forest like wind through tall grass. The wolves answered in a howl that staggered between sorrow and relief. Half of them rose on their hind legs and walked toward the light, their bodies peeled away as mist, their footprints filled with silver rain. The others, Those who had fought to live every curse as penance remained by my side. Eyes wide, fangs bared, not in defiance but devotion to breath itself. The moon offered no judgment. It merely waited. I felt the pull of the veil inside my bones. The names I had released were leaving my veins one by one, slipping upward like dreams recalled by their owner. Each departure was a pain so pure it almost felt holy. Every soul I had guarded tugged a thread of me with it. By the time the 100th rose, I was half shadow, half shine. The witch watched me fade. "Your name is in the ledger," she said. "Shall I cross it out?" I looked down at my hands, one still human, one still clawed. "I was the knife," I said. "Let me also be the scabbard. Keep me until I'm needed again." "You think the world will need you?" "The world always needs something to blame when the moon turns red." Her smile was tired, ancient, a crack in stone that had learned to humor rain. "So be it." She lifted her hand. The remaining light split into 2 ribbons, one for her, one for me. Hers spiraled upward toward the veil. Mine sank down into the earth, tracing my shadow like an afterthought the world refused to erase. When her ribbon touched the moon, it flared once, a brighter white than truth can bear, then vanished. The witch was gone, only her voice remained, woven into the rope's final vibration. "Sleep well, my wolf. Guard what dreams may remain." The veil folded inward, closing like a book. The moon sealed itself, a scar across its face, a thin, silver smile. The blood was gone, only light remained. Around me the candles died down to 10, those that refused to quit. 10 souls the moon had kept for reasons it did not share. 10 tiny hearts beating in wax and flame. I knelt among them. Each flame reflected a different face I had worn. Guardian, monster, sun, sin. Their light painted my fur in bands of gold and ash. I understood then that the curse had never been about hunger or blood. It was about memory, the moon's way of keeping a record of love that hurt too much to speak aloud. I spoke to the candles. "You burn for them now," I said. "Burn long. Burn honest." The forest nodded, its leaves clapping softly. When I looked up, the night was no longer red but silver. The wind moved without pain. I could hear rivers laughing at their own reflections again. The world was not healed. Nothing ever is. But it had remembered the shape of healing. I rose. Each step sounded like a page turning. The wolves that remained followed me into the trees. They would not stay wolves forever. Already I could see their shadows straightening, their eyes darkening back to human. They would wake in beds tomorrow, aches in their bones, dreams in their mouths that tasted of fur and truth. At the ridge's edge, I paused and looked back. The forest of candles was a sea of embers now, fading, but refusing to die entirely. 10. Flames still stood, stubborn as memory. I realized I was one of them. I tilted my head to the moon and howled, not in grief, not in victory, in continuance. The sound rolled through the valleys and the villages, a reminder carried on breath and fear, and something close to love. A few candles flickered brighter. Somewhere a child stirred and dreamed of running under a friendly sky. When the howl died, I spoke to no one and everyone. The moon stitches what it can. It keeps a ledger no hand can carry. Tonight it closed one wound and left 10 scars to remember where the blade had been. I walked down the ridge as dawn found its voice. Light crept between the trees like forgiveness that didn't need permission. Behind me the candles finally went out, save for one. It relit itself, a small rebellion against peace. The moon winked, the forest smiled. And the curse slept, not ended, just waiting for a story brave enough to wake it again. If you felt the heat of those flames, like, share, and subscribe before the last candle goes out. Tell me below, if you could erase one sin By name, what would you whisper to the moon? Whispering narratives, stories that bite and never let go.